Okay, so I have to give a little introduction to the video I made about a month ago. It's called the Jesus and Mary ritual. Not what I call it, it's what the Satanists call it. And I need to give some context to this thing because it's so unbelievable. If you don't understand the strategy behind it, it makes no sense. So, and I'm short of air because I got COPD, so it may be difficult for me to talk a little bit. Well, the first thing is female pedophiles exist. That's a fact, and many female pedophiles are nuns. That's a fact. All pedophiles, unless they are the parents, will make mommy and daddy references while they're raping the kids. It's universal. Mommy and daddy do this all the time. Mommy said this was okay. Daddy said this was okay. Mommy said you should do this. The priest will put the kid in a position where the kid will see the priest talking to mommy. Then a few days later, he'll say, remember when me and mom and dad were talking? They told me that this is okay. So these things, and the purpose, of course, is to divert the kid's focus from the perpetrators onto the parent, for them to get away with it, right? Blame the mother, blame nature, patriarchy, worship the empire, et cetera, et cetera. It's a long story. But what this does, it destroys families. It breaks the natural bonds between the parents. It gives the mothers lifelong heartache, fathers too. Why is little Johnny not loving me anymore? Why is he always mad at me? I didn't do anything. Even one time, one pedophile doing that one time to a kid, that can break that bond between the parent and child, and they can never get it back if nobody remembers and figures out what happened. So the Jesus and Mary ritual takes this strategy to the extreme. And why? It's to set up mother and son to hate each other. Although my mom could never hate me, but I hated her for years because of this. I had no idea why until I started remembering stuff. So they'll feel suspicious of each other. So they'll blame each other for how they feel inside, even as they are both being raped on a regular basis over a long period of time by the same criminals who set them up in the first place. The Jesus and Mary ritual sets up mother and son to both be available for long-term sex and to blame each other for how all that makes them feel. Right? These priests and nuns can't rape millions of kids because there'll be too many witnesses. So they pick out a few lucky winners, I was one of them, and they focus all of their systematic, bizarre, horrific, violent, satanic theater onto those few kids and vulnerable adults so they can get control over them and then rape them at will for many years. They wanted me, I don't know, because I had a pretty face, whatever. They wanted my mom because she was gorgeous and a very naive hillbilly convert, right? She converted so she could marry my dad. She'd also been looking for something spiritual to fulfill her life. I'm running out of air here. Now, my dad was a typical devoted, alcoholic, workaholic Catholic. He was easily kept ignorant of what was going on, having absolutely no conscious frame of reference to even imagine violent, ritualized sexual abuse happening to his own family. This story is another video which will clearly explain why they picked out our family, but it's too long for this introduction. So he was a good Catholic who gave the church at least $100,000 over his lifetime. His reward for his loyalty was to have his wife and his firstborn son drugged, tortured, and raped for many years, including being forced to have sex with each other, and also other of his 7 children being molested by nuns also. That's why my brother died at a young age of heroin addiction. That's another video. My dad's reward for his loyalty was to have his family utterly destroyed. Utterly. So anyway, the Jesus and Mary ritual, it's not what I call it. It developed over centuries, at least since the time of Caligula and the Holy Roman Empire. And it's developed as an elaborate method to gain control over the victims, right, for years of fun-filled sexual abuse, and to neutralize those victims as witnesses. No one will believe them. The story is too bizarre, too horrible, too disgusting, too perverted, too embarrassing, too terrifying, and too unbelievable. They made it unbelievable on purpose, so no one will believe it. It's a strategy. And if you ask how long they could have kept this all secret for so long, they didn't. They did not. There have been hundreds of thousands of witnesses reporting this kind of abuse since the time of Sigmund Freud. His first important written work as a young man was about ritualized abuse of his patients. He was not allowed to publish that paper, and he was then maneuvered into a situation where he would have lost everything if he pursued that line of exploration. So he dropped it altogether. He blamed the parents and went on to become famous Sigmund Freud, blah, blah, blah. That's a whole nother video. So I need to mention again, they gave us drugs to block the memories, but I began remembering anyway in 1991 as a result of extremely traumatic events going on in my life, which triggered these memories. And once I started remembering, I eventually remembered all of it. Now, if you don't believe in repressed memories, call the Veterans Administration. Thousands and thousands of soldiers since World War I have been coming back from war with severe PTSD and repressed memories of horrific atrocities they either witnessed or committed themselves, which they remember years later in therapy. That is normal. That is how human beings handle horrifically traumatic events in their lives. They repress the memory and then remember it years later. That is how it works. That is how it worked with me also. This thing called false memory syndrome is bullshit. It is a lie. It is not science. It is not accurate. It is pure propaganda, period. So with all this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my direct, personal eyewitness testimony recorded last month of the Jesus and Mary ritual. The second grade. Now, the next thing I'm going to mention is something that actually happened when I was 3. This was the very first thing that happened to me. It's so abhorrent that I really have trouble talking about this, but it really needs to be told because I know it hasn't just happened to me, it's happened to other people. So this ritual happened when I was 3 years old. This is called the Jesus and Mary ritual. That's what Satanists call this. I don't know what the priests will call it. So this happened when I was 3 years old. The way I know I was 3, like you could remember back when I was 2, I was older than that. 2 is almost a baby, but by the age of 4, I wasn't quite that up to that yet. So I know I was 3 when this happened. So anyway, this happened on a Sunday as far as I remember. My dad handed me off to a nun for some reason on a Sunday before church. I'm guessing it was a special event for the children. Probably what he was told, whatever special event to separate the kids from the parents. So she took me across the parking lot from the church to a small dark building, separated me from the other kids. Oh, this was did I mention a nun grabbed me by the hand and took me across the parking lot? She shoved me into a small dark room, pushed me onto a metal folding chair and ordered me to be quiet and left the room. So in front of me was a long table. I sat there whimpering for quite a while. Eventually the nun returned with a second nun. They did not have habits on and they were wearing a great deal of gaudy caked on makeup and their hair was short and chopped up. The one nun looked very tough and mean even with all the makeup. Her expression was angry, bitter, hateful, and somewhat nauseated. The other nun looked hysterical. Her eyes were wide. Her expression was a combination of wild excitement and total disbelief. She looked nuts. She was probably all coked up, I'm guessing. Now, obviously, I was not able to analyze or verbalize these kind of specifics then. However, now as an adult, I can accurately describe these very vivid memories as they came to me during my flashbacks. So the nuns brought in with them a woman my mother's age. She was very pretty, she was blonde, she was very thin, the same as my mother. She looked just like my mom. She was staring straight ahead with a completely blank look on her face. I don't remember her eyes being glassy, but the lighting in there was poor. The nuns took off her robe and she was naked. They guided her onto a table in front of me. I vividly remember her moving something like a machine, moving only where and when the nuns moved her, otherwise she was completely still and completely blank. So the blankness of her stare straight ahead as if nothing was there, that scared me and gave me shivers. Remember that. I have no doubt now that she was very heavily sedated. And I would just like to remind people as you read this, this is something that someone else did to us. We did not do it to ourselves. Please associate the sickness of this event with the perpetrators and not the victims. Well, anyway, so the nuns laid her back on the table and then spread her legs in front of me, and I was staring at her vulva. I cannot describe with words the fear, confusion, and revulsion of a 3-year-old boy in this situation. Then one of the nuns pulled me off the chair and pushed me towards her. They both asked me if I loved my mommy, and I said yes. They continued to push me slowly toward her as I resisted. When I was close enough, the mean one pushed my face into her vulva and told me, "Love your mommy." I started crying and shaking. She told me to stop crying and asked me if I wanted to burn in hell because Jesus will send me to hell forever and ever if I don't love my mommy. And she started swatting her hand with a yardstick. I looked up and she was glaring down at me as she swatted her hand. Her glare seemed to do something to me because my fear went into a deeper level, something I really can't describe with words. She seemed to transform into a demon. She communicated torture and domination as she stared into my eyes. Now, looking back, it is obvious that I had been drugged, and the drugs had begun taking effect then because it seemed as if I was in that completely evil universe again. There was absolutely no joy left in me. Everything was negative. There was no positive at all. Positive did not exist. Again, these were not my thoughts. This was how I felt. So she commanded me again to love mommy. So I stared at the vulva, but was unable to move. Oh, sorry. So she shoved my face into it and commanded me again to love my mommy. I threw up and the nun was furious, rubbed my face in it and told me not to do that again or I would burn in hell forever and ever. They cleaned my face, cleaned out my mouth. I remember the taste and burning sensation of some sort of antiseptic on the cloth they used. They cleaned up the vomit and told me again to love mommy now. Again, I stared, but was still unable to move. The nun then held a long needle over a candle while she glared at me. The other nun held my mouth and nose shut with one hand and held me still with her other arm. Then the nun with a needle lifted my arm and slowly moved the needle toward me as I watched in terror and burned me under my arm. Then she immediately shoved the rag dripping with antiseptic against the burn, and that hurt much worse than the actual burn did. I wanted to scream, but I was muffled because I couldn't exhale. She then told me my whole body would burn like that in hell forever and ever if I didn't obey Jesus. So she pushed my face into the vulva again, and this time I began doing everything they told me. Where to kiss mommy, how to kiss mommy, where to lick mommy, how to lick mommy, where to suck, how to suck, what to do with my lips, what to do with my tongue, what to do with my teeth, etc., etc. They both watched very closely and the mean one screamed and slapped me if I did anything wrong or if I didn't understand. So during all this, of course, I felt an intense fear, horror, dread, terror, confusion, shame, embarrassment, anxiety, self-loathing, self-disgustingness, there's no word for it, nausea, and so on. And all that was mixed with the completely bizarre kinds of sexual feelings I had no way of processing at that age. There is really no way to describe how much I suffered as I obeyed these nuns. Everything in me wanted not to be there, not to be doing what I was doing, but of course I was there doing it anyway. There was a war raging inside me during the entire ordeal. After a while, one of them must have put a devil mask on my mom while I was preoccupied and then propped her head up so that she was facing me. I stopped what I was doing, frozen in even deeper fear and dread as the devil looked down at me. Her head then plopped back against the table and I couldn't see the mask. Oops. They did that a few more times, alternating with the mask, then without the mask, then with, then without, so that I would see looking down at me, first the devil, then my mommy, then the devil, then my mommy, then the devil, then my mommy, and so on, several times. So the association, of course, she became my mommy, the devil, in my drugged mind. This simple association exercise put an impression in me to blame my own mother for the entire event, to associate all the evil of the entire ritual with my mother rather than with those nuns, to blame my mother for how I felt inside rather than this ritual. So I must have passed out for a while. When I woke up, the two nuns were naked except for masks they were wearing. The masks were of young, beautiful girls, like something like Halloween Barbie masks or fairy princess masks, beautiful and sparkly because of the belladonna or whatever drug they gave me. Then they took turns forcing me to love them the way I had loved mommy. They were sitting on the chairs with their legs open, both obese and very pungent, and I threw up again. I remember feeling the overwhelming intensity of anger as the mean one rubbed my face back and forth in the vomit, telling me I will burn in hell forever and ever if I do that again. They cleaned me up and continued to rape me. I heard sounds coming from them which, influenced by my fear and the drugs, sounded like monster, demon, devil type sounds, putting me into an even deeper fear. Of course, it was their sexual grunts and moans and heavy breathing and so forth. And when they orgasmed, I thought they were dying or being tortured or something. It was, in my mind, absolute horror, confusion, shame, etc. So after a long time, they were done with me. The nice nun must have taken off her mask while I wasn't looking. She started sobbing and shaking, and then picked me up and asked me to please be just like Jesus. Please forgive her just like Jesus would. Please be her little Jesus, and so forth. She held me next to her heart and hummed soothing music and rocked back and forth for a while. Yeah. So as she stopped shaking and crying, I started to relax also, but then the other nun, who had put the devil mask on when I wasn't looking, who I had not seen while I was being rocked, suddenly lunged at my face and made a terrifying scream, and I must have passed out. So I had already learned to associate that mask with my mother, but I know now it could not have been her because she was so heavily drugged. So of course, more fear and blame associated with my mom. Next thing I remember, I was being walked very quickly back across the parking lot, pulled by my hand so that I had to run to keep up back to the church. Inside the vestibule, the nun told my dad that I was a little sick and needed to go home. She bent down and gave me a big smile and told me I had just had a bad dream and everything would be okay, and then gave my dad a big smile too. I was so confused. I was looking up at my dad and he smiled down at me also. He didn't have a clue. How could he? How could anyone even fathom that something like this was going on in the world, much less that this had just happened to their own wife and son? He had no frame of reference for ritual abuse, obviously. So those same nuns and others, both male and female, got me a couple more times before we moved to a new parish when I was 4. So again, like, this is so unbelievable. Like, why would they do this? Why would they include my mother in the rape? Why did they force a mother and son to have sex with each other? Why all the masks and drugs and religious references? Why? To make the rape completely unbelievable and completely disgusting to both of us and to anyone else who was ever told about what happened. To make it completely impossible for either of us to ever face what happened. To make the rape so abhorrent that no one would take any communication about this seriously. To make it so abhorrent that their victims would immediately be disbelieved and rejected as insane if they tried to report the incident. To make it so abhorrent that the victims themselves would be unable to even think about it after it happened, and be incapable of believing what happened even if they did try to remember. That happened to me for years. Why did they do it? To make any suggestion of what happened evoke an immediate denial reflex, both in the victims and in anyone hearing or reading about the incident. So why did they do this? Because that is how they got away with it. If I had only been raped by the 2 nuns, and I don't mean only, without any of the other ritual content added to the rape, the effects on my mind would not have been nearly as agonizing and debilitating, and I possibly would have remembered and reported it as soon as I was able. My inability to allow myself to remember what happened is what they hid behind. In order to remember the nuns' rape, I had to also remember the entire ritual, including my own mother, because it was all one single incident. And what about my mother's experience of this? She was drugged but partially conscious. Imagine what it did to her to look down and see her 3-year-old son doing what I was doing each time they lifted her head up to see. In both cases, they hid the rape behind the ritual. The drugs, the devil masks, the Barbie princess mask, the constant references to hell and Jesus, my own mother being put into the ritual, and all the rest. It was all a smoke screen to utterly confuse us and completely overwhelm us with confusion, shame, guilt, fear, all of it to conceal rape. And my mom was also raped many other times by other clergy. So this is still going on today all over the world in secret, inside the church and beyond it, on a scale much larger than any sane person would want to believe. Most of the adults involved in this live completely above the law, without a worry in the world, because normal folks refuse to acknowledge or address this problem. How could you? So that's the end of that bit about what happened with me and my mom. I will say that she spent most of her adult life in Mercywood Mental Hospital being visited by the same priests and nuns who'd been raping her. So we'll end it with that for this session.